Good morning. I am Janann Archibald. I'm the Legislative Liaison for One Sky Community Services. And today I'm here recording a session with Tim Baxter. He is a congressional candidate for CD1 who will be hopefully running against Chris Pappas in November. So welcome, Tim.
Thanks for having me today.
Thank you for talking with us. So we wanted to invite you on and just to have you tell us a little bit about yourself, get to know you and the other candidates that are running for CD1 against Chris Pappas. And we're really glad to have you here. So if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, we'd love to hear it.
Sure. Well, it's my pleasure to speak with you all. And so I'm a state representative right now, and I first ran for office after really getting involved with my brother, who my older brother has Williams syndrome, intellectual disabilities. And what was going on with my brother was he lived in a wonderful group home, and because of changes in reimbursement rates from the federal government, that group home was at risk of closing, and 12 people with intellectual disabilities were at risk of being kicked out of their home. Some people had lived there for decades, and they would have been forced into the foster care system through New Hampshire and would have had to go through that system and would have hopefully been placed into different homes. But it was just truly a really alarming and awful situation that all 12 residents didn't want, and the family members of the residents didn't want. And so the family members of the residents came together, and I helped raise money to keep the group home afloat so no one with disabilities was forced into the foster care system. And that was my first involvement in our community, not just helping my brother, but helping other people with disabilities. And it really woke me up to how badly our politicians are doing when it comes to representing us, especially those that are in the most need. And it made me motivated to get more involved in our political system to help those that are least fortunate in our community, especially helping those that can't always help themselves. And so I ran for office, and I ran for state rep. I represent Seabrook and Hampton Falls, and now I'm running for Congress for the same exact reasons. I'm tired of seeing politicians take advantage of those and use their position of power just to enrich themselves and grow their own power. So the disabled community is something that's really important to me. And it was one of the reasons I wanted to become more engaged in our political environment, because I see so many politicians that are forgetting our disabled community.
Thank you. Thank you for telling us a little about yourself. And I have a few questions that were submitted from our community for you. So I'm going to jump right in, if that's
Sure.
all right with you. Okay. So the first one is, how do you view the current state of New Hampshire's systems on disability supports? And what are your beliefs about the capabilities of people with intellectual disabilities?
Well, I would say I'll answer the second one first. I think people with developmental or intellectual disabilities are capable of anything. I see it in my brother with Williams syndrome. Part of his syndrome is he does things in a way that I can't. For example, he connects with people. He loves to meet new people, and that's a beautiful, beautiful gift. And one of the reasons that I'm pro-life, for example, is because I've seen the impact that my brother's had in my life. And just because someone has a disability, their life still has tremendous, tremendous value. And so I don't think we should set arbitrary limits on someone just because they have a disability. In terms of how our system works to help those with disabilities, I think it's very, very complicated, and that's part of the problem. We've seen in the past couple of decades, even with new programs coming about, that employment rates are not increasing for those with disabilities. And we have a huge problem in this state and in this country with making sure that we can help get people fulfilling jobs that have good incomes behind them. And so how we fix things like Medicaid and housing and employment to work for those that are disabled, I think we need to streamline these programs and make them less complicated, but also make sure the support is there. Our government should make sure that we're helping those that can't help themselves first and foremost before we're creating new entitlement programs on top of that. We need to take care of those with disabilities first. So I think we have to, realign our goals and who we're going to help first and foremost, and make sure we're taking care of those with disabilities before we're creating new entitlements that we can't afford to pay for right now.
Great, thank you. Our second question comes, and it's about direct support professionals. And these are the folks that take care of our individuals in the community, as you're aware. So the question is, many community colleges across the country have direct support certificate programs. Some states subsidize the program so that it's very affordable. Do you think there should be a federal incentive? And do you think there should be some minimal national requirement for a person to work with individuals with developmental disabilities?
So I think one of the main problems that organizations like One Sky has is hiring. And you see this not just with One Sky, but you see this all throughout our economy. And inflation is really taking a toll on our economy. And so what's happening is the wages that groups like One Sky are allowed to pay, or in some cases can afford to pay in their budgets, is not keeping up, and they're not able to hire workers. So first and foremost, we need fiscal sanity in DC. If we're spending less money and if we balance our budget, that will keep inflation in check. And who does inflation hurt the most? It hurts people on fixed incomes, which most of our disability community, or a lot of our disability community, a big portion of their income comes from things like SSI, for example, my brother, and then also Medicaid. We have folks that are on Medicare, and inflation is really is hurting folks with those programs that benefit from those programs. So that's inflation to help that, to make sure their dollars that they're getting, they can continue to use those, but also it's hurting to make sure that we can get help in organizations like One Sky. So I think that's the biggest macro solution to making sure we can get more help easily for these organizations. But also, I think we need to give more flexibility to groups like One Sky. The government shouldn't be telling them how much they have to pay or can't pay to attract workers. We should make it as easy as possible for these organizations to bring in new workers, because, for example, there might be a regulation that says you can only pay X amount of money, but now in this high inflationary environment, that just doesn't work for an organization like One Sky anymore.
Thank you. So our third question from the community is about long-term services and supports. How would you create a system of long-term services and supports that sustains the rights of disabled Americans to live in their homes, as well as lifts up and supports the domestic workforce? Now, you touched on that a little bit already, but do you have any further?
Go ahead. Is there anything else?
Nope, that's the end of the question.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll add a little more depth to, making sure we have more flexibility also for those that are disabled with our support. So I think one program that's helped with that is ABLE accounts. You see this not just with the disabled community, but in general. Once you get a certain amount of money, you're at threat of losing a certain percentage of your services or all your services. So you see this often where folks, they won't want to make a certain amount of money because they might lose their Medicaid. Or, for example, if you're disabled and you get a job, if you have intellectual disabilities, you might lose your SSI. So ABLE accounts were created relatively recently so folks in the disability community could continue to save and grow their wealth while still receiving the services that they would before. It's a really, really important program. And programs like that, we should continue to expand to make sure it works even better for those that are disabled. In addition, with housing, for example, what was the problem with my brother's group home? Fundamentally, it was they changed the reimbursement rates and they changed how Medicaid was funding housing, right? Before, Medicaid was funding group homes for those like my brother, but then Medicaid arbitrarily decided that they didn't want to. This wasn't a law passed by Congress. This wasn't an executive order created by a president. This was just the bureaucracy, an unelected branch decided that they didn't want to fund group homes for those that were disabled through Medicaid. That's a huge problem because that impacts hundreds of thousands of people across our country that are disabled. So these programs that are there to help those with disabilities, we should make sure that they're as flexible as possible. We should give as much options to organizations like One Sky and parents of those that are disabled to stretch money that's available for housing or healthcare or income support like SSI, so they can use it to the best to help themselves.
Great, thank you. Now, the next question is about housing, and you've touched on it a couple times, but especially here in the Seacoast, you'll hear a lot of folks talk about the lack of affordable housing, not only for the individuals, but for the workers who often have to commute a significant distance because they can't afford to live in the Seacoast area. So the question is, the lack of affordable and accessible housing continues to be a significant impediment to people with disabilities and their families achieving economic security. And so you talked about this a little bit, but are there any further changes you would implement to remedy this situation?
Yeah, so I'll just touch on, I think, the problem with housing for a sec, because it's not just those that are disabled that are maybe more likely to rely on programs, but just people that are working with organizations with One Sky. And if you're not making a ton of money and you're living in the Seacoast, that's really hard to do. We've got a problem where we're not building new housing at the rate in which the demand in the market is asking for it, essentially. And that's why the prices are going up and up and up. On top of that, to get really detailed, the Federal Reserve, until recently, they had been buying tens of billions, they're tapering now, but they had been buying tens of billions of dollars of mortgages a month. So that is juicing the market. And I'm in real estate myself. It's helpful for landlords, but it's not helpful for tenants. And it's a huge structural problem. We've essentially been redistributing money from working class folks, everyone else, to the elite. And so that's a huge, macro policy change that they need to change. But then in terms of what we can do in New Hampshire, I would say we need to make it easy to have new houses built. I think we should loosen up zoning in lots of places, do it responsibly, but make sure that we can build new houses to help increase the supply of housing, which will reduce the rate at which rents are going up. And then also we need to make sure that we have as many types of housing options as possible for those that are disabled. We shouldn't just say, well, we believe that everyone should be in this type of housing. The more options we have, the easier it is for people to find the right option for them.
Okay, thank you. So our next question comes, it's an issue, I think, overall, but in particularly, it's been emphasized since COVID. Social interaction is an important part of development and well-being for everyone. Since the onset of COVID, it has been particularly difficult for everyone to engage in activities outside the home, but especially in the DD community. Between the lockdowns, the health risks, lack of staff, and closures, it is further isolating individuals. Do you have any suggestions on how to manage the situation and thoughts on how we get out of this cycle?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think like the state of New Hampshire, like the rest of the country, there's a wide range of what people feel comfortable with. There's a lot of people that they're willing to take a little more risk because they want to be out in society. And there's some folks that do not because they just don't feel comfortable with that. And I think this is something that politicians or government shouldn't mandate or force on anyone. I think each community, each group home, each person, each parent has to, each guardian has to make these decisions on their own. So I think it's a tough one. I think we should continue to encourage things like testing. Look at Governor Sununu. He's just rolled out hundreds of thousands of at-home testing kits that they're doing it through Amazon, and they're helping to increase testing for people all across New Hampshire. And that's a good thing because people will feel more confident to get back out into society when they know that they don't have COVID or gather at events, whatever it may be. So continue to increase testing. The vaccine is widely available for those that want to get it. We shouldn't force it on anyone. But I think we're in an environment now where hopefully in the coming months and years, things will start to get back to normal. But I think it's a challenging one because there's a wide range of feelings in terms of what people feel comfortable doing. And the reality is we can't force people to do certain things if they don't want to do it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it's definitely a difficult situation with a lot of opinions, so I appreciate you tackling it. Okay, my next question is, if you ask any parent of a DD child what their biggest fear is, they will say, "What happens when I am gone?" This speaks to the amount of advocacy that is required in order to get the appropriate service and supports for their children. Why do you think the system requires such a strong advocacy presence to get services the individual is entitled to by law? And how do we fix this?
It's a great question. So I guess I'd say two things I think about with my brother, Taylor. It's not just, there's so much more, I feel like, than just the money side of it, navigating all those programs, right? SSI, Medicaid, HUD for my brother, as well as things like an ABLE account. It's also just, making sure he's okay, fundamentally. Does he have a job? Are there people that love him, that care about him? And I think we all worry. I think it makes it a little bit easier with my parents knowing that I'm around and I'm right next door, that I'll always be there for my brother. But it's a really tough thing. And there's no easy answer to that. I think as a community, we've forgotten about people with disabilities, and they're often so isolated. And I think a lot of guardians feel like they're the only one there for the person with disabilities, and that's it's a really sad thing. I think in terms of the programs, we need to streamline all these things like ABLE accounts and SSI and Medicaid and HUD, and there's all these different parts of it that just make it very complex, where most guardians have very little understanding of it, because these laws are, look at the Medicaid Act, which was passed in 1965, right? It's thousands and thousands of pages now. There's no way, even experts in it don't completely understand it all the time. So as much as possible, we need to simplify these things. But I also think electing representatives and having the community as a whole, community leaders, be more engaged in disability issues, I think that will help as well. Because for too often, this community is just forgotten. And as I said before, one of the things that motivated me to get involved in politics was my experience helping and raising money for my brother's group home. And I saw politicians of both stripes. This wasn't a partisan thing. It just seemed to be a lack of representation thing, where politicians didn't care that people with disabilities were at risk of being kicked out of their home, and wouldn't pick up the phone, wouldn't respond to us. That's a disgrace. You've got 12 people with disabilities in New Hampshire that are at risk of losing their home, and politicians, not like the politician themselves. I give everyone my cell phone number so they can get a hold of me, whether they like me or hate me. They should be able to talk to me. But you couldn't even get an assistant for politicians, a low-end minimum wage staffer or volunteer to return a call. That's just an indictment of our political system. And if we have leaders that are actually trying to represent this community, I think that will go a long way too.
Okay, thank you. And our last question comes about IEPs. So, and this again has a wide range of opinions. For some people, it works very well, and so for some people, they find themselves in a dispute resolution situation. So this is for the people that find themselves with an IEP dispute. They feel the IEP laws are complicated and parents need representation. In the meantime, while these disputes are being resolved, it's the students that are not getting the supports they need. How do families get advocates and attorneys to resolve IEP issues in an expeditious manner? And how do you see the role of our local politicians in this issue?
So I think one of the biggest solutions to making sure students with disabilities have a high quality education is school choice. Um, and I know it's not exactly what your question asked, but that's the first thing that jumps right off the page, so to speak, to me. Um, you know, students with disabilities, arguably, they depend on a high quality education the most. Education is supposed to be the great equalizers. People, whether it's someone with a disability or whether it's just someone that comes from a low income background, education is supposed to give them the tools. So if they work hard and they're highly educated, they can achieve the American dream and they can do whatever they want in society. And just look with the past roughly 18 months or so with COVID, we've seen places like in Manchester, for example, which are predominantly lower income, where schools are shut down. And you've got students that are trying to complete assignments on their computer, but they don't have a computer. They need school choice the most because their schools weren't working for them. Any student in the state and every student with disabilities should have the option to go to any school they want. And that way, if their specific support programs for students with disabilities aren't working for them, they can go to a different school that actually works for them. But right now, students with disabilities, unless you're rich, are trapped. They have to go to the district where they live. And if those services aren't working for them, they have no other options. The way we fix that is with school choice. And that's something I've fought tooth and nail for and will continue to do.
Okay, thank you. And our last question as we wrap up just today is just tell us about yourself. Like, what motivates you? What are your goals for the future? Why do you do what you do every day?
Yeah, well, I'll just recap because I think I've answered that a little bit, but just a little more about kind of what I believe in. I really believe in empowering people, and I see politicians through bigger government and bigger government are empowering themselves and enriching themselves. And I saw mostly through the work that I was doing for my brother and his group home, how horrible, to be frank, many politicians are, and how they ignore and take advantage of those that are the least fortunate in our community. And that's so often folks with disabilities, unfortunately. And it just really motivated me to get involved in our political community, especially as someone that's young, to try to do better, to actually represent people and solutions of empowering people by giving them more choice, making it easier for people to get a job, to get a high quality education, things like incentivizing consumer-driven solutions through more competition in things like healthcare instead of just giving more control to politicians. These are the types of things I've been fighting for, because what it means is it means higher quality of life in people's lives. It means a better ability to get a job or to start a business. And these types of things can have a huge impact in people's lives. And I just wanted to make a difference. So that's why I got involved in politics, and that's why I'm running for Congress.
Great, thank you. So we can thank you. This is our state representative, Tim Baxter. You can follow him through our legislature through Gen Court and see what he's up to. And they can also follow you online with your campaign. Right?
So my website to learn more, it's baxterforcongress.com. And then Facebook, also Twitter, if you're there, is Tim Baxter NH.
Okay, and we will post all of that along with this video when we put it up. So Tim, thank you for your time. Thank you for your hard work as state rep, and we appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Okay, take care.